Unlock the future of pathology with Pathology News, your ultimate source for cutting-edge insights, expert analysis, and the latest breakthroughs in digital and computational pathology. Don't just stay informed, stay ahead.
I'd like to move the conversation on to clinical diagnostics. I think we're going to probably talk about what PathAI is doing in that space as well. Just to ask you, a first question on that, when you look across the full pathology workflow, where do you see the most immediate clinical applications for AI?
Yeah, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but the immediate applications in the clinical space for AI pathology are most definitely in the workflow efficiency area. The reasons I've already talked about: consolidation, increased work, increased complexity. And we have developed a platform for labs to go digital. And the category is called image management system. So this essentially becomes the portal for pathologists to do their work. Our IMS is called AI Site DX. And we are really laser focused at the moment on applications like case assignment, case prioritization, slide QC, tumor cellularity, biomarker quantification, because it's these efficiency tools that labs really are resonating with because they help drive workflow efficiency through the lab.
Yeah, great. It's great to see what PathAI are doing, really. The triaging of cases using AI is such an obvious use case for it.
Absolutely. And in fact, just a little anecdote. So the College of American Pathologists last year had 2 webinars on this topic of case assignment and triage, because it is such a massive problem. I've actually spoken to labs, a lot of labs, that say there are actually disagreements, so passionate disagreements and borderline fights that break out because pathologists get distributed cases unfairly. So we can just ever. So like you said, and I were in a 2-person pathology practice, and 20 cases come in, and you get 10 cases and I get 10 cases. If you get all the hard cases and I get the easy cases, you're not going to be so happy with me. So what AI can do is look at all 20 cases in advance and make sure that not only do we each get 10 cases, but we get 10 cases of equal difficulty. So that's one example of what AI can do.
And is this something you're looking to build into PathAI's IMS?
Absolutely. You think about, what are we trying to do with AI Site DX? What is our goal for this platform? It's really about rethinking the entire anatomic pathology workflow, a workflow that hasn't changed in nearly 100 years. So the big picture is, as many people will know, there's multiple work cells in the lab, from specimen grossing to embedding to microtomy to case assembly, et cetera. So how can we look at all of these work cells and through the lens of AI and think of ways we can improve each of them? But really ultimately, and most importantly, how can we improve the pathologist's ability to generate data and information that's relevant for patient therapy? So that's what I think is most exciting about this whole transformation, is that pathologists will be able to provide better, more therapy relevant information to the clinicians and to the patients themselves.
I love that approach. I think the term augmented intelligence comes to mind here. And moving on to something else I'd like to ask you about, which is a lovely feed into it, is trust. And that's the trust between the pathologists and the healthcare system, and the trust between the patient and them knowing they're getting the right diagnosis, whether AI is used or not. So, I suppose my question is then, what evidence threshold do you think AI pathology tools need to meet before pathologists and healthcare systems can fully trust them?
I think this is a super important topic of trust and evidence. But to answer your question, I think there are 2 forms of evidence that are important here. We certainly need to do more large validation studies that show the efficacy and safety of these AI pathology applications, or all AI applications in healthcare. Some of this we already have, but we need to continue to develop more. But perhaps more importantly, we need everyday practicing pathologists to trust these tools, because they use them every day and they see that they work. They see that they're adding value to what they do. And so I think both need to occur. And thankfully, we're seeing progress in both areas. But you also bring up, a bit of an ethical question that is emerging with AI in healthcare. What rights do patients have to know or reject the idea of AI being part of their healthcare decision making? So I think this is uncharted territory where we don't have all the answers, but there's some really interesting questions being asked.
Yeah, it's fascinating actually, and the research that's come out recently that reviews how patients trust AI, specifically in histopathology, points towards the fact that they would like to have AI in the loop, but they absolutely want the human there as well. Now, I did want to move on to the precision pathology network, which it develops over at PathAI. And I guess my first question for that, thanks to AI, we're starting to bring together all of these different data modalities, which is something we've discussed already. What do researchers gain when they can link AI-derived histology features with clinical, molecular, and outcomes data?
We have touched on it a little bit, but the exciting thing is that we have created a new data element, especially with tools like our Explore series. So we have a product called Path Explore for oncology that structures H&E data. We've already talked about Liver Explore and IBD Explore. So this literally is structured data that didn't exist before, but all of it based in pathology and the slides that our pathologists are used to looking at. So I think the opportunity is multimodal, and I hesitate to use that word because I think that term has a lot of hype behind it and is overused, but I truly think it's relevant here that we can now apply AI in a multimodal way to this new structured histopathology data, to molecular data, to clinical data, and see and explore. And personally, I would find it surprising if we did not see improved ability to predict patient outcomes by combining all these data elements together. But we have to do the experiments to see.
Yeah, fantastic. And to think of genomics diagnostics as really at the forefront of combining all of this data, do you think histopathology data will become as queryable and as computable as genomics is now?
I absolutely do. And so to go a little deeper on one of these Explore algorithms, I'll just use Path Explore as an example. So this is an algorithm that we created that a lot of academic researchers and pharma companies are using. So this structure, the standard H&E slide that pathologists look at every day, and it creates hundreds of histomorphologic biomarkers from a single H&E slide. So this absolutely is as queryable as genomic data, and I think represents a completely new era of discovery, which is why we're so excited about it.
Great, thank you. And leading on from that, I really wanted to dig into the precision pathology network. It's a really interesting move from PathAI. Could you tell us a bit more about that and what it is, why it's being designed, what it's trying to solve?
The Precision Pathology Network, or PPN as we call it, arose because our two main customer segments as a business, as we've discussed during this call, is the clinical market, so practicing end user pathologists and pathology labs, and the pharmaceutical industry, including biotech companies. And so we realize that more and more, each of these stakeholders wants to engage with each other. And so to explain it briefly, the PPN is the ability for PathAI through our platforms like AISight to link pharma and biotech to clinical labs, and likewise link clinical labs to pharma around specific use cases. And there are four areas where this usually takes place. One is data licensing. More and more labs, of course, in an anonymized way, are interested to license their data. And pharma, of course, is very interested, based on their program, to have access to real world data. The second is research. There's a lot of research ongoing in pharma around novel drugs, novel predictive biomarkers that clinical labs can participate in. The third would be early access programs. So as pharma is developing these novel companion diagnostics, including AI companion diagnostics, they want to have clinical labs launch them on day one. And so the only way that's possible is to have an early access program where these labs have early access, for example, to an IUO version of the diagnostic. And then in day one, that can be converted to the commercial approved version of the diagnostic. For the lab, the reason that's good is because they're the first lab in their market to get access to that novel tool. And then the fourth area would be clinical trials. So through the PPN, we can connect labs who are relevant for a particular clinical trial, the pharma partner running that trial. And more labs in the clinical space want to participate in these pharma programs. It's a useful connection point that we can serve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm interested. What does PathAI stand to win from this? Are you dipping into the data yourselves for training algorithms?
Yeah. So as a connector, it depends on the type of interaction. But let's just say companion diagnostics. So we are involved in the development of these AI companion diagnostics.
Mm-hmm.
So it's be helpful for us to talk about early access programs to train pathologists, to have the AI validated in these labs before they're launched in the commercial space. We like the idea of the precision pathology network because it also plays into the virtuous cycle that I was telling you before about really seeing this ecosystem start on the pharma development side and ending up in the clinical diagnostic side.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Eric. And, I'm just thinking about those participating laboratories then. What's the value proposition for them, beyond simply just having access to the software?
Yeah. So again, depends on the nature of the collaboration. As I mentioned, the early access program allows a lab to be the first in their market to offer a novel companion diagnostic. So that differentiates them from their competitors. They like that. If it's clinical trials, they benefit that they'll generate revenue by participating in clinical trials. And also participating in the clinical trial establishes a working relationship between a lab and a pharma company that can be sustainable. And then the data licensing is more transactional. So that's just it's a revenue generation is really the primary benefit for the lab there.
Yeah, great. And it really sounds absolutely fantastic for these labs, whether that's hospitals or institutes of another fashion. But do you see this as not just a new revenue stream, but perhaps even a new business model for digitally mature labs churning out a ton of data?
I absolutely do. And especially over the past couple of years, and I think this is globally, but certainly in the US, pathology labs are desperately looking for new sources of revenue. And I think 10 years ago, the idea of working with a pharma company maybe wouldn't be received so well, but now we're in a completely new environment. So I see a lot of interest actually from labs to engage with pharma companies. The question is, what specific area, like we talked about, makes the most sense for that particular lab and that particular pharma company?
Could PPN help smaller regional labs participate in research and drug development in ways that were previously locked up and limited to major academic centers?
Absolutely. You are correct in saying that historic engagements with pharma companies were limited to large academic medical centers, large health networks. These are often trial sites for pharma companies. But now, in the era of AI, I absolutely see opportunities for smaller labs to participate in these trials. And there's one particular type of trial that we are actively discussing with pharma and several labs. And this is the idea, and the audience may be familiar. In the era of precision medicine, often these clinical trials are focused on very rare patient subsets defined by a rare molecular subtype, things like ALK, NTRK, et cetera, in the field of oncology. So with AI, we can develop H&E based algorithms that predict the likelihood of these genomic alterations. So pharma companies like this because it saves a lot of time and money to start by screening for these rare alterations using an AI algorithm from a easily accessible H&E slide. The smaller labs have the opportunity to participate in these trials because the community labs are seeing most of the patients, but they don't typically have the advanced technology like sequencing to participate in the trials. But everyone has H&E slides, and we can equip all these labs with the algorithm. So it's a really interesting new dynamic with the smaller labs that is made to be a reality purely because of the AI pathology tools.
Yeah, great. And thinking about this as a functioning network, then, what governance, consent, privacy, and data quality standards are needed for this network to work?
Yeah, really important topic. It really, as you can imagine, depends on the specific PPN project. But as an example, sponsored research in collaboration with our pharma partners looking to run real world evidence studies to support, for example, medical affairs goals, where those could be awareness or education. So these kinds of studies run like any other research program, requiring appropriate ethics, IRB approvals, protocol approvals, and of course, appropriate patient consents. But each of these opportunities, when we investigate them, explore them with the pharma company and the lab, we go over all of this in detail with both parties to make sure that especially the lab can meet the requirements of the opportunity prior to starting the project in the first place.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And it's been a really insightful discussion today, but to really start to wrap this up, I have one final question for you, which is, do you think, and to take it back to the human element, do you think the pathologist's role will become more interpretive and integrated as deep neural networks handle more of the measurements?
Absolutely. So, as a pathologist myself, I could not be more excited about the future of the field of pathology enabled by AI. And it hasn't come up in the discussion, but I'll say it now. The goal here is not to eliminate pathologists. I think this is very important. This is quite the opposite. This is about elevating the role of the pathologist to be what I like to refer to as the chief diagnostics officer for a healthcare system. They really become the architect of the patient's precision medicine diagnostic workup. And what they will be freed of are all those tedious tasks that they don't want to do anyway: counting mitotic cells, searching for an acid-fast bacilli on a stain, or enumerating PD-L1 TPS. These are tasks that no pathologist I've spoken with wants to do. What they do want to do is contribute to patient care by looking at the case and determining what additional testing, including companion diagnostic and precision medicine testing, is necessary as a next step in the patient's management. So for those reasons, again, I could not be more excited about where the field of pathology is going, powered by AI and digital pathology.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, I think that's us for today. It's been a really insightful discussion. We've learned a lot about PathAI. We've covered clinical trials, PPN, and a lot of the other tools that PathAI have come out with recently, which are really supporting not just research, but clinical diagnostics as well. To our audience, thank you for listening. We hope to see you on the next Pathology News podcast. And Eric, once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sid, for all the interest and the insightful questions, and thanks to the audience for listening.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye for now.